Hello.
Welcome to Conversations for the Planet 2024. We will start right now, so we can take the most of this event. I'm thrilled to kick off Conversations for the Planet that is organized by the DESIS network, and which is dedicated to launching a new challenge to all DESIS labs and to the design community at large, placing climate and environmental sustainability at the heart of our academic and research practice. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Teresa Franqueira, the International Coordinator of the DESIS Network. Alongside me, I have Gisela Pinheiro, who is a member of the DESIS Network coordinator team. Together, we are honored to be guiding you through this enlightening conversation today. So the environmental crisis calls for urgent action to protect our shared home, and the design community must play a leadership role in finding solutions. And today marks a significant moment for DESIS and the entire design community as we delve into this conversation about what on earth connects design with soil care. This event aims to catalyze the sharing of knowledge about social initiatives for the planet, challenging our DESIS labs to develop more projects to tackle problems that are related to the climate crisis and environmental sustainability. We are honored to have two influential voices in design with us today, Thackara and Ezio Manzini. They don't need any presentation, but let me introduce Thackara. He's an author, curator, and professor. He is known for his work in designing for life and caring for place with social and ecological systems. Ezio Manzini, president of the DESIS network, has been a driving force in promoting social innovation as a major driver in the ecological transition. Our conversation will be moderated by Louise St. Pierre, professor at Emily Carr University and the coordinator of the Canada First DESIS Lab. Louise will brings invaluable insights to our discussion, drawing on her research into how design can influence low-impact behaviors and lifestyles. So following the main conversation, we'll open the floor for a lively debate, and I encourage everyone to participate actively. So without further ado, let's dive into Conversations for the Planet and explore the critical connection between design and soil care. Thank you all for joining us today. John, the floor is yours.
Where is John?
In fact, John
disappeared.
Yeah, in fact, John has disappeared.
We lost him.
Yeah.
Ahora sí dijiste.
Most likely we'll discuss that.
I will ask everyone to mute your mics, but in fact, we don't know what happened to John. As you do, you have John's phone number, so we can try to.
I don't see him, so it's strange. It disappeared just when you was
for the last half an hour, and he disappeared.
His screen froze and then he disappeared, so I suspect it was an internet problem.
Yes? Oh la la.
Hmm.
And,
that's why I was asking if you have his phone number, so...
Well, maybe if we can use this time, given that I was supposed to talk after John, but while I'm sure that he will appear again, so but I can say something that in some way is also
Here
a part. It's back?
Yeah.
Okay, so I stop. John, where are you? Eccolo. Hey!
Yeah, John, in the moment I was giving the floor to you, you just disappeared.
So are we ready to start, or you already started?
Yeah, you are ready. You are ready because I have already introduced everything. So The floor
Shall
is
I-
yours, John.
I'll start again. Hope the fingers crossed to everybody. Hello and welcome to everybody. This is sorry about it's one of those days.
What happens? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, John frozen again.
Mike, what?
We for everyone that is here, we were like 30 minutes talking with John and everything went okay. And now that he starts the presentation, Ezio, if you want to
Yes.
to continue what you were saying.
The show must go on, so I am part of those that enter in the circus when it's necessary. Yes, so waiting that John saw the problem. Of course, everybody of you know what more or less what is the topic. The topic is that design has been always said to be human-centered, and now we say there should be more than human-centered. So this is, I think, that is not to be discussed in between us, because if you are here, it means that you recognize the importance. I want only to stress some aspects that comes for having this discussion inside something they call the DAISY's conversation for the planet. So DAISY started, when it started, was 15 years ago, and everything, it was this called Design for Social Innovation towards Sustainability. So it was assumed that everything that we were doing was also as a contribution to the transition toward a sustainable society. As a matter of fact, what we did was to support and to propose and to try to trigger something that was putting people together and going in that direction also. But for sure, 15 years ago is really 1 century ago, so it's a long time ago. So many things changed, and now we have to take some issue in a different way than it was when we started. So we, with Teresa, we started already since some years this conversation on the planet to try to update in some way what we are doing. And one of the main issues is this one that we are going to discuss together. And this is clear. So the next step is, yes, but in the DAISYs, we are designed for social innovation. So it's not only what is the relationship between design and the non-human, that could find many solutions, many activity to be done that are not necessarily social innovation. So this is what I want to underline and also to make it very clear. So there is a lot of things the designers can do that is not related to social innovation. And for what I've seen until now, the majority of what is called design for the more than human is not expression of a kind of social activity, but it's the result of some new way of looking to things, to some individual activity, to some way technological choice to be done, or some reflection on some philosophical issue. All this, I won't say and repeat, is very, very super important, but we have, John, I finished the phrase, we have to try to discover if there is also a role for social innovation. Okay, John, are you there?
I'm here. So
Okay.
should I just keep going?
Yes.
So these are the 3 points that I wanted to cover in another 15 minutes, but it's the same 15 minutes. Firstly, why is soil care important to anybody, including us? Secondly, what design actions follow from the proposition that soil care is central to our concerns? And then thirdly, in what sense is soil care a social activity in which social innovation can play a key part? And part 3 is intended to lead back into the introduction. So for part 1, why is soil care important to us? The short answer is that without soils, there's no food. So in my experience, that's a fairly direct way to get people's attention. I don't need to talk a huge amount about the question of the crisis of soils and its relationship to climate, the relationship to food systems, and so on. I will just leave it there as the short-term reason that we are not the only people looking at soil. Everybody is saying, what can we do to reduce and reverse the negative impacts of soil? But there is a longer answer, which I think speaks to the whole agenda of the relationship between design and sustainability, namely that we are in the process of ending an age of separation between man and nature that probably has roots going back 500 years, depending on which history and which theory or which ethnography you read. So it's not a small thing that we're doing at the moment to try and mend this gap between the man-made world and the natural one. So that is, but soil for me is the medium of reconnection that we've been looking for quite a long time. And we've reached a point right now, today in 2024, where we have this very curious sort of bifocal world in which the technical world is allegedly leaping forward again with new platforms and technologies, with machine learning and AI and so on. And at the same time, the living world is the subject of tremendous attention, but by a completely different lot of people. And so we have this split that the age of separation re-expresses itself as it done in the previous years. And so for me, the basic story of why soil care matters is not a complicated one, it's just hard to do, namely that the well-being of people and the well-being of nature, with soil as the central part of that, they're a single story. It makes no sense, and it certainly won't work if we want to make the world a healthier place and leave nature as some kind of separate thing. So, quick 2-minute action on why soil care matters. My second part of my introduction is, okay, that's not such a radical proposition. What design actions follow from that statement that soil care is at the center of our concerns? And I think what's so challenging but also exciting is that the scale of actions that many of us here are involved with range from the microbiome to the bioregion. And I think this is genuinely new for design in terms of its multiple geographies. And with those multiple geographies come multiple timescales. And it's quite amazing to me, frankly, how quickly our attention is turning to a revalorization of the past in many different sorts of design. And I'll tell you about a couple of those examples a bit later. But in other words, multiple timescales and multiple geographical scales are the, if you could call it that, the frame for the actions. But in the last, I guess it's 10 years, I've decided that there are 3 families of action that designers can concern themselves with: drawing attention to soil, getting people to look at it, think about it, decide that it's something that they can be involved with. I think we've had a tremendous intensity of that in recent years, but it's of course not yet done. Point 2, it's a whole range of actions to do with the physical and ecological restoration of soil, which is beginning to build up momentum in many different contexts around the world. But that's when we decide we are going to do something with others to make the hot soils healthier, not just look at them or study the problem. And then the third family of actions, and I think this is the crucial long-term perspective, is caring for soil over the long term into the future. What does that mean to care for soil? And in what ways can design make it easier for us or for other groups to care for soil? I've, I guess, had 10 years of collecting or experiencing moments of transformation just on a personal level, in which the soil question turned from an interesting subject to something that touched me. This was 12 years ago in Sweden on an island when I first had something called a soil tasting ceremony. I don't want to go into the details of this. You can look it up. It's all over the place as an activity and a practice. The main point being that this is kind of activity where something shifts from being a mental preoccupation to an embodied experience, which I think is fundamental to the kind of transformations we're trying to make. About 4 years ago, I had a step further from, oh my goodness, soil, I can feel it is important. I then began to make a reconnection with science, which is also transformative in its ways that I never expected. This is work by Julian Lieber to render visible the mycorrhizal networks that go through the forest floor in a wood, like you see on the left, an incredible universe of metabolic processes, the search for nutrients, the exchange of information, the search for water, all happening more or less invisibly under that carpet of leaves. Once you start to be sensitized to what the scientists regard as their everyday, although admittedly wonderful activity, that transforms the embodied experience that soil is crucial. And they add up, and this is, as I said, a very short introduction. Andreas Weber said, it's all about designing for shared aliveness, not just looking and not just caring, but feeling that we and the soil and the millions upon millions of other organisms are part of a similar unified system. So that, if you like, is the kind of the family watchword from Andreas. And the other word, which we're learning in many different contexts from indigenous cultures and in different knowledges, is that it's not about becoming experts in a kind of lists of things to do with the soil. It's all about the relationship between the parts, between the microbiome and the bioregion, or here where you see nature's internet, the mycorrhizal fungi, their interactions. It's the relationships that we need to attend to. And the more healthy the relationships, the better we're doing as a carer. And as I said, it's so important that it's a very new and frankly rather difficult task to figure ways to learn and to feel at multiple time scales. That was somebody, okay. So the scale of the microbiome and the scale of the bioregion, as I said, they're different in geography and in time. But if we're going to properly empathize and interact with them, we need to figure out ways of doing that. This is not at all something design will do on its own, but I just want to put it out there as one of the very fascinating challenges ahead of us. In terms of restoration, moving on, we're now going to physically make the soil healthier. There are a million activities out there. The ones you can see here, they're basically at different scales and in different locations. I'm not going to say now how design can contribute to these activities, just to say there are many, many ways in which designers can be very useful in all of these contexts. And we can discuss that in the chat if that opportunity arises. But I also want to emphasize that soil care, attending to soil, coexisting with soil is not principally something that has to happen in pleasant rural locations. It's not you go into a national park or a farm and find some nice soil. On the contrary, I think the biggest opportunities for design, and this has been, a revelation to me of Germain Meulemans, a Belgian ecologist, urban soils have fantastically more potential, not just to be restored, but as sites of biodiversity. So this notion of the urban context of soil restoration and soil care, I mean, we're just beginning to grasp what this can involve, but it means we don't have to kind of get into artificial urban-rural divides, but look at ways of making a very badly damaged site like this one here in Belgium, real sites for restoration. And in an urban context, you get this incredible combination of microbial and urban and bioregional scale. The picture on the bottom left is a microbial survey, street by street, building by building, to see what kind of microbiomes are there in the city, what shape they're in, what can imagined to be done about them. It also operates at an urban scale when you start to connect the abstract notion of soil health or microbial health with food systems. So this is this very fascinating reimagination or repracticing of Berlin as a farm, in which the connecting together of food growing activities and food processing activities begins to transform the metabolic health of the city. Not kind of bulldozing the whole place and starting again, but connecting lots and lots of dots together. That takes the metabolism and our care for the metabolism in a different direction. So designers can be part of these processes. I'll just give you a few examples because they're such wonderful, they're inspiring to me. I hope they are to you. I think Francesca Valsecchi is here, has for several years a project with her Ecology and Cultures Lab, got designers and artists of different kinds to say, how can we interact with a soil, a tree, an ecosystem in new ways, using tech if necessary, not necessarily, but basically the task is to change the notion that the tree and the person are separated. This is in Polyme 2 weeks ago, I said to a group of designers, how can you help people connect with the soil in a new way? And this is one of the groups on the right that discovered, to my amazement, that soil conductivity of electricity is an indicator of soil health, which I didn't know before. And if you're interested in Milan, there's a show opening tomorrow, if anybody's here from Milan, with some of this work in that. I just heard this half an hour ago. The point being, it wasn't a very difficult job for me to get these, in this case, industrial designers to look at soil. They thought it was a very normal and fun thing to do. And within 4 days, they came up with 5 separate platforms for relationality with soil. 4 days that took, not 4 years or 4 centuries. And then last week, I was in Scotland for a week, another week, separate week, at the Winter School of Glasgow School of Art, with designers of different backgrounds from different places. A not totally dissimilar question: in what ways can you connect people with the soils of this, in this case, country estate in the far north of Scotland? What can you propose to change the way we look at soil, treat soil, and care for soil? And then again, 4 days, it's just like opening a door which is already open. Here's a group that looked at mycorrhizal fungi that I told you about and said, how can we turn these fungal networks into part of a memory system? Can we wire up our brains to the mycelium and have some kind of two-way interaction? Now, I'm not going to pretend that they solved that question, but the point is that they thought it was very normal to look at mycorrhizal networks and human brain networks and bodies and environments as part of the same situation. So they have already started on the search for ways to enhance and deepen the connection between people and mycorrhizal networks. This group discovered after 1 day that soils have the capacity to store information in diverse manners. And within 2 days, they came up with a system of memory storage and archiving experiences that could be embodied in those soil balls you see at the front. And they were halfway to figuring out what to put in the balls, the soil balls, where to bury them, how to look after them, and so on. Some of this is existing known technology, some of it is speculative. The point is that these guys thought it was completely normal to look at soil as a storage information, much as the mycorrhizal fungi interacting with the internet. Here's another group looking at how can we explain to people that soil histories go back millions, tens of millions of years. Big subject, an important subject. The point is that they came up with a combination of a physical installation together with a printing technique of soils taken from different geological natures, a tactile and embodied interaction with the notion of millions of years of soil. I never thought of that before. They did that in 4 days. But the most interesting, perhaps, and I'm 5 minutes from my end here, it's not just about physical interactions with soil. It's not just about how we care for soil as a material. It's also about the relations between human organization, our cultures and our governments and our power systems with the natural world of which we until now thought we were separate. So this is a group that included a political scientist from Central Asia who was an expert on the commoning traditions in Kyrgyzstan, came into the group, had never met a group of designers in this context before. Within 4 days, they had started to make the prototype for a scenario in which soil becomes an actant in a political system, commoning in which humans and plants and the soils are in some way co-equal. And they were well on the way to devising a kind of charter of the soils a different way of how to conduct negotiations and so on. This is where the notion of design as a kind of designing with a material and designing with the context in which the material is used has a role to play, but absolutely not by itself. It's been quite an amazing sense to me that one political scientist introducing some new thinking can transform a design project in like 2 days. But it goes to the same for, what did I learn about? Ethnomathematicians, paleobotanists. There are so many scientific bodies of knowledge out there that are beginning to cross disciplines, and design needs to very quickly embrace and catch up with these mixtures, because the insights but the practicalities that follow are extraordinary. And there is the site in Scotland, not seen from a satellite as a bunch of abstract data, but as locations for design interventions that have just started in the case of Scotland, but will be evolving over the years to come. Multiple disciplines, absolute co-equal participation of all forms of life, and well as the citizens who live there. This is the kind of formal statement of values. This is just one example of many, many places where you're seeing this sort of soil as a medium of connection and relationship. So to finish my provocation, my introduction, in what way is soil care a social activity, in the sense that it relates to the community coming together around decades of social innovation over a period of years? I very strongly suspect you already know lots of ways, so I don't actually have to make it easy for you, but I'll just tell you where I've got to in coming up with 3 or 4 discussion points. The first is that although it is true that human beings have a tradition and perhaps a learned and a genetic predisposition to collaborate, there are many practical ways in which things can be made easier for collaboration, sharing, and coexistence. Ezio's own work is pretty much at the center of this notion of social infrastructures as things that can be designed as well as co-created. But I think it's important, and it's inspiring to me, to look at the historical legacy by not starting from scratch. So in the middle, you can see one of my prized possessions, which is one of the first English language publications of mutual aid by Peter Kropotkin, who 110 years ago was writing a history of collaboration then, a history of sharing between species and between humans and between communities. And on the right is a newer book, which I don't know how many of you know, by a Romanian writer. It's very inspiring, like Ezio's work, in terms of what do we need to do as designers, or perhaps as political scientists, beyond saying we must collaborate, or that more than human is important. And Michner came up with this notion of infrastructures of reciprocity, which I think is maybe something that we can talk about in the discussion. And those include these kinds of examples, social and ecological structures, connections between the urban and the rural, some AI, for sure, we can discuss that, but crossing through them, the notion that infrastructures for reciprocity will be service intense and beautiful. Otherwise, why should we devote our energies to that? I have to mention the how to do it map on the left is from my friend, Professor Lo Yonchi in Tonji, that Ezio also knows, and many people here. That was the result of my last dinner with him a couple of months ago. And he said, here's your marching orders, John. Here's what we're going to do together. So it's clear as mud, and that's absolutely as it should be. But I think that it's actually pretty simple, what we're talking about here. This whole subject of reciprocity and meeting and solidarity is about being in the same place. One of the most important examples, inspiring examples to me, is the way that farmers in the south of Italy in the WhatsApp movement, how this was in Scotland, people looking after watersheds and rivers, becoming hands-on scientists. The notion of studying the life in a soil or the life in water up close, citizen scientists and professionals together, it is quite magical to me just how powerful that kind of thing is in terms of creating a sense of mending this gap between nature and culture that we've all been kind of suffering from for so long. And I very warmly recommend you check out the Findhorn Water project. It's quite amazing, very, very inspiring. And yeah, I think that's enough for me. I do little events called Infrastructures for Reciprocity, and I think the conversation we're going to have now is another example of that. So I'm looking forward. Now I will stop sharing.
Thank you, John, very much for your presentation. I will give the floor to our moderator, Louise and Pierre. Louise.
Thank you. Thank you, John. I want you to know that your work has been inspirational for me for at least a decade now, and for many others, I'm certain. In the conversation that follows, we will be moderating the chat, so we will be watching for your questions. So don't hesitate to post your questions in the chat. But I would like to start the conversation with a question that I know that Ezio is really wanting to address, and that is the question of social innovation in this context. A lot of us are very comfortable with understanding the need to reconnect with nature, to mend the gap. A lot of us are very comfortable with the understanding that the earth is in a deep state of disrepair, and that to change things, we need to start by changing our relationship with nature. We need to move forward in new ways. And I would suggest we also need to change our internal understandings of who we are in relationship with nature. But that's not for now. Maybe that will come up later. I just plant that as a seed. But over to Ezio. Ezio, how do you feel about social innovation in this context?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. And thank to John, that was very clear and enlightening as always. And for who was already there in the moment in which John disappeared, started to say something, so I can answer to the Louise question moving from there. So what I was telling is that myself personally, but also in this moment I talk as a DESIS, we really need to try to imagine if and how DESIS, that means Design for Social Innovation towards Sustainability, can be more clearly related to this. And given that we know that there are already several DESIS labs that are working on these topics, how we can use our network to help each other. Because this field is so important, dramatically important, I would say. It's so fascinating. It is so difficult and also slippery. And also, one point that I like to say again before answering to the question is that this is an international, but I would prefer to say intercultural network. So we like to put together people that have a common goal to move toward an ecological and just society, but they move from very different directions. And since the last year, we really started in many ways to try to better understand our differences, because we think that the differences are enriching us. I think that if we talk about the more than human, and in some way what has been in a naive way called nature, is one of the points that is more cultural dependent. So I think that the differences in between us, the positive differences in between us, could be even greater. And therefore, I'm really excited at the idea that maybe we can create a cluster on this topic that could be also the arena where to discuss differences that are positive differences, as I said, between what is the Western point of view or what is the other culture point of view. I have to say, I am talking as a person that was born last century and socialized in the Western point of view. So whatever I will say, and I will be short, I promise, but the few things that I will say move from this point of view, from this starting point. This is challenging for me and for the others. I think that we, the ones that represent the Western culture, we have to be conscious of all the disaster that we have done. But at the same time, at least for me, the Western culture has also a critical side. There is a line of critics that also is generating ideas on how to manage our relationship with the non-humans. So there is a discussion about the non-humans that comes from the Western culture, as there is a discussion of non-human that come from the indigenous culture and from other kind of culture. So I advise that I'm talking by one point of view, and I think that the richness of what we can do is to try to compare these differences. Given that, and sure I will be very short, I answer to the question. Sorry, Louise, if I said this before, because there was a little bit of, let's say, political issue on this, and I like to make this statement before answering to your question. So thanks to the presentation of John that said presented many interesting ideas, but also the obviously quick overview on different projects, give us the spectrum of what could be. And we have seen some projects that are a kind of technological design, technology done also with the biological organisms, but a kind of technological design. There has been somebody that was there to make some communication, and I'm sure that there is a lot to work and very important things to be done as communication, to communicate, to try to change the mind of people and to move in this direction. But it also said, presented a project in which we saw people organizing themselves in different ways. So if we say that the core of the story is attention, restoration, and care, we need somebody to do it. And the way to do it, now I'm super schematic and simplifying, could be top-down and bottom-up. That means that could be that there are some government, some entity that take care, that make some laws, that make it happen, because and we need also that one, by the way, in my view. At a certain point, we need also some bottom-up norm that try to consolidate some way of doing, okay? But there is also what the people can do. And we have, and also in the very quick, the picture that we've seen very shortly, we saw people doing something. So what these people are doing, and the people in some way are doing something together, and this is a new social organizations, new way of having social forms. And Design for Social Innovation is looking to new social form that can emerge, energy from people that can use to do something. There is a contradiction in saying that we are here talking the more than human, or how to care for the non-human entities, and to talk about social organization. We can discuss. In my view, not, because we as human beings, we participate as human beings, and we can do a lot of things, and we can do things in different directions. And also, and I conclude, in my personal superficial overview of what could be the social innovation related to taking care or having relationships with this non-human. First of all, there are two different sides. One side is when the non-human do not express itself or herself, as somebody preferred to say, and when the non-human express itself or herself. What does it mean? I mean that we can have a community for a river, community for a wood, community for a bioregion. So we can, and we have already example of group of people that goes together to take care, or better, to be the voice for non-human entities that do not have voice. And therefore they voice for them. And they are in some way the representative of the river, the wood, the bioregion, etc., etc. And there is a lot of work to be done, because each one of them afterward at a different scale, from the very small to the larger one, have different way to organize, different way to be motivated, different actions that can be done. And this is what we do. So I think that all we have learned about community making for other reason can be also used to talk about community making when the reason is to give voice to some non-human entity. And in my view, there is a lot of things to be done, a lot of already some example, but maybe for sure many more. And also what happens, how they can be consolidated, how they can become new institution, new infrastructure, as said John before. So to be capable to generate new bio infrastructure, and at the same time, maybe also some change in the institutions. So this is the same story that I'm telling if I talk about how you can change the city, the relationship between something that's more bottom-up and something that are more molecular and something that create new structures. To conclude, I want to say there is also another line that I don't know how to put them together, but it's for sure something related to the non-human and the human. And it is when, in a much more clear way, the non-human have a voice. Because, no, sorry if I laugh, because there is nothing to laugh. But when there is what we call catastrophe, when there is the river that goes and flow everywhere in a land, when there is also a pandemic. So these are non-human entities that have a very strong voice, not our human voice, but they can change the reality and oblige us to react. And I think that there is another line of talking about social innovation non-human is to see what happens when people react or act after that the non-human take the voice in this way. And probably the two things have also some blurring, one in between the other ones, but I am not capable, in any case, I have not time now to talk of this. I want only to say to the answer to the question, to the Louise question, that for me, for sure, and in my point of view, in my Western European culture, yes, and I'm very curious to see by different point of view. And I hope that we will have the possibility to do what we said, so to create a cluster on this topic and have the possibility to confrontate different kind of experiences.
That sounds fantastic, Ezio. And I'm, excuse me, I'm really interested in what's happening in this conversation in terms of the discussion of who has voice, who has agency. Ezio, you alluded to how the natural world, how nature or the earth has a voice in speaking up by showing us that, all of a sudden the air is not as breathable, the waters are not easily drinkable. There are all of these impacts directly on human life that the earth is vocalizing, saying you've done too much damage. But what about the actual balance between authority and power in these voices? Are we still, as humans, discussing the earth as a lesser voice, as a voice that is too hard to hear, in other ways than by showing us the impacts of what our behaviors have made on the planet? So what I'm saying is that, there are cultures and there are practices that help people listen differently, to hear the tree, to hear the mountain, and to do this without the intervention of technology. It's about changing our own epistemology and our own ontologies. Over to you, John. What would you say about that?
You're right. And Ezio and I are two old white guys sitting here, observing the speed of change that's happening. So there are many voices and many cultures which have a much deeper understanding certainly than I do. And I just think that you're right, Louise, that the other cultures, for other cultures, this is not a kind of new question. So I think it's just tremendously sensitive ground for me as a commentator, a writer, to say we should learn from indigenous peoples about how to communicate with nature, because it's not for me to make that decision or that kind of demand. But I do think that we all have the notion of how to listen is something that it's a practice that we can absolutely develop. I don't know about the particular example. I wanted to show you some examples of farmers meeting each other and meeting citizens and meeting with some artists who represent living systems other than humans. These things are happening out there. And I think it's just we have to tread with tremendous kind of sensitivity and respect in collecting these examples. My basic response is there are things happening out there to answer your questions, Louise, and therefore we have to be much more curious and look far outside our normal bubble to find them.
I would agree. And then I think that we have to come back to Ezio's other question, which is how does that land in design, and how can we start to think about design in a different way? What's our new epistemology?
Is that for me? Yes. Anybody?
Yes,
The others are going to come in. I mean, I think that the last years I've learned the most from people outside the traditional design world who are coming to the same discussion. For example, we've both mentioned the care of watersheds and rivers. There are so many examples in which caring for a river is not just about taking samples or satellite images or, traditional scientific actions. It's about unlocking, blocked perceptions and blocked forms of relationship and love for rivers that were there before. Just last week, I heard about this most amazingly moving experience in the Findhorn River in the north of Scotland, where there is a group of people who are responsible for the restoration of the watershed. But one of their first actions was to convene with some arts producers a concert in which musicians were different ways sang songs of the watershed from different points of history, in which the geography of a map that we would normally see became a backdrop to a concert in which the kind of different ways of representing that which cannot be represented, for example, through language, but also through music. And one of the organizers said that she could almost hear the mending happening in that room because of this was not just a scientific exercise, it was about music and culture and a shared and embodied experience. If you have good curators and good producers who are super, super sensitive, we can actually make transformative events like that happen in all our watersheds.
Agreed. Absolutely. Ezio, did you have anything you wanted to throw in on this? If not, I'd like to ask Aguinaldo if he'd like to speak up. I'm seeing some interesting questions from Aguinaldo in Brazil that coming up in the chat. Would you like to speak your questions?
No, just you see, the existing knowledge we have in design really is not enough to teach what Thackara is telling there and Manzini is saying. We don't have enough knowledge about the aesthetics of these new aesthetics of a life-centered design. We don't have enough knowledge about how to co-create of other forms of life. So how would you bring that to the undergraduate classrooms? And particularly, many students ask, is there a professional future for a designer that does that on the short or medium term? Because we do very much this on the postgrad, on workshops and so on. But do we have already a demand from governments, industry somewhere, like we could provide them a possibility of a future of a life-centered design? And just am I concerned about the undergrads, how to bring that to the classroom? We don't have yet enough literature and didactic material and so on. But if I have funding, I would bring Thackara to Brazil every week. But
can I just answer that just to say that, I think it's a very serious question. I take it seriously. Does anybody want this stuff? Who's going to pay for it? Where do we find the time? And Aguinaldo, you're quite right. It's just not an easy thing to suddenly put this into the picture. However, my energy and hope comes from the fact that I've had experiences over the last 6 or 7 years in which if you make even the smallest opening available to people to go for a walk in the forest, to go and walk along an urban street, looking at weeds in the cracks, to go and stand next to a tree with an arborist, little encounters of 1 hour with no agenda, just learning and listening, they can be transformative. I have absolutely no worry about the interest of undergraduates or children, all sorts of people. The institutional obstacles indeed are much harder. I think you're right. There's no time in the timetables. There's no resources. I don't frankly think we need lots of literature and materials. I think we need time, presence, and attention. Those are my three magical ingredients. But just because they're simple doesn't mean to say they're easy to find. But if it's time, just take little bits of time. If it's co-presence in a piece of nature, it can be an hour. And attention is about creating space in our curriculums to stop telling the students things and just give them the space and the time to think and listen to each other.
I totally agree with what both of you are saying. And Aguinaldo, I mean, this question of whether or not there is work in this area is something that we can't actually deal with yet, because this topic is in its nascent stages. It's a research topic for design where we really don't know the answers yet. And I think that what we do know is what John is saying, is that the commitment is there, that there is an incredible emotional power to rediscovering that we human beings are part of the rest of a living system. It's extremely, it's a beautiful thing to watch students learn this. But we don't know yet where the employability sits in this, because the capitalist system doesn't have a value on really caring for the planet as designers. It has a value on, designing us beautiful things that help us deal with, the continually decreased air quality that we're having, particularly in Canada now in the summers with the fires. So we have beautiful artifacts designed that help us adapt to these increasingly untenable conditions. But we don't have a capitalist system yet, or an alternative to the capitalist system yet, that says this is extremely valuable work, designing with nature, empowering. Sebastian, I'm not sure what you're saying there. I've got a note from Sebastian. You are not stuck in capitalism. You are capitalism. I don't know if that's personal to me, but maybe it's all of us. But what I'm saying is we don't have it yet, and we have to figure it out, and it's going to take a leap of faith. And I know that 40 years ago, when designers wanted to bring humans into the design process and really learn from them, learn what they wanted, learn what their hopes and wishes were, and allow that to influence the design, there was no room for that in the industry at that time. And through the work of designers, through the works in research, through work in universities, it became human-centered design, which is now a common practice in industry. So I take that as an example for how the profession and the industry and the expectations can shift over time, but we need to do a little bit of the legwork now.
Louise, so just
Yes.
sharing some of my experience in Brazil, what I've been doing last year is to do projects together with the indigenous communities, and they are far more used to connect with nature than we in the urban area. So the Brazilian indigenous communities, they have even spiritual relationship with nature that guiding the eye of the young designers through the eyes of the indigenous communities. It really fast track the process of learning about nature and the dynamics.
Yes, we do that here in Canada as well. Ezio, you've been quiet for a while. You're muted. Ezio, you are muted.
Said that I prefer to leave the space to somebody else. Maybe I can say something afterwards if there is time.
Okay. I'm seeing in the chat that some just a notion, an understanding, a shared understanding that we love the concept of thinking of other parts of nature as kin, and in the indigenous understandings, that's not a concept or a thought. It is an actuality. It is an embodied way of being. There is a story from one of our indigenous advisors here at Emily Carr. His name is Aaron Nelson Moody, and he's known as Splash because his Squamish name is Splashing Eagle. So affectionately, we call him Splash. But he tells a story about how the forests were taken care of in his culture over millennia. And because his community understood that forests have a lifespan much longer than a human lifespan, that the forest lifespan is centuries, it became a generational learning where the women of the community were entrusted to care for the forest, but they were also expected to pass it on to their daughters. So it was a matrilineal lineage of forest care. And that these children grew up knowing the forest from their earliest age. So this embodied sense of care, this embodied knowledge, I think it stays out of policy. It stays out of kind of an intellectual superimposed notion of care. John, do you have any thoughts on that?
I'll tell you where I've got the biggest inspiration in the last period about trying to understand what this care word means and how it might be relevant to design comes not from indigenous peoples, but from the nursing profession, because the most interesting reflections and also practice have come from people who deal with sick people on a daily basis, not in terms of doing things to them as a doctor would do, but in just caring for a patient at any point through before or during the biomedical system. And the basic, this is where I got these three words, presence, care, and attention. The presence of people in a place, in a sense of solidarity, but also in being part of the family, is something which indigenous peoples regard as very natural, and we have unlearned. But if you're a nurse, nurses don't do things to people. Nurses care for people in their context and in their sort of greater history in ways that, you know, the mechanical minded amongst us can't really appreciate. So I do recommend, if anybody's interested, I can provide some references to maybe designers can work from the nursing professions, if not immediately from indigenous peoples with who are not actually there to teach designers. But I just think there's so many people in different disciplines looking at this problem from different angles that, you know, the answers are there. And just a quick extra sentence. I do appreciate that nobody has the time for this. It's all the whole system of education, of jobs and careers is a horribly constricted and frankly very unhealthy situation.
Yeah.
But where, if you just look, there are people around the edges of every system who are finding ways to create a bit of time, a bit of space, a bit of silence. Those people can help us, and they're there always somewhere. Always maybe the people who don't speak at meetings, or people like me who are talking all the time. Go and find the quiet people, work with them, and see if we can learn ways to create more space that way.
Absolutely, absolutely. I just saw a comment from Britta, and I would love to hear from you, Britta, if you'd like to speak up about care. And then after that, maybe Tokusho would like to speak up. I see a couple of interesting comments from Tokusho. Britta, would you like to speak?
Hi, Louise. Very grateful to you actually for your infrastructure of care. You helped me out a few years ago when I was doing my PhD. So, I mean, I just think that it just to acknowledge, I mean, women, you know, the sort of invisible care that we do, I don't think that is acknowledged enough either. And I think that might be also part of the problem in design science, that it comes from a lineage of, I mean, I don't want to get into that kind of binary argument, but of patriarchy. So I think making space for these other ways of knowing is also a caring act.
Lovely phrase. Making space for other ways of knowing is a caring act. Thank you. And also, you know, just an acknowledgement of how many women are working in this field. You know, at one point I was writing a list of women we could be drawing upon for Conversations for the Planet, and the list was about, you know, 10 or 15 scholars long, just to begin with, from my own tiny head. So thank you, Britta, for that. I wonder, Tokusho.
Yeah, that's me. Yeah, Tokushu is good.
Tokushu.
Hey, yeah, thank you very much for the wonderful conversation. I'm very encouraged that so many people are on board with this topic. It's gives me great enthusiasm. And since in the last few years, I've been working with some local partners on this idea, a couple of ideas. One is about, our different points of view of what is, when you care for something, what's the abundance or wealth that comes out of that kind of care, right? And then, so we've been working on a concept of yutaka, which is like a Japanese word for what is the wealth or abundance. It also happens to correlate with the idea of health in Japanese. But this kind of work, we kind of connected with the soil. So if you don't mind, I think because it's 1 a.m. at night in Japan, so it's easier for me if I have a visual guide to help me along. We worked in put in a little proposal in Cumulus, which was the first place where I learned about the thesis, but we put in a little visual paper, and we were trying to care for the damaged, the stressed lands where it's very close to the nuclear power plant in Kagoshima, and how to look at the soil there, how to bring about like a culture where we care for such things, and looking at the kind of way to move away from how to improve that soil so that it's actually something that is bringing about wealth and abundance for us. And I guess the hope I have is that, yes, like globally, everybody is seeing that this is an issue, and many political actors are starting to push in this area. But we need to start from something very, very small. So actually, what we did was make a bunch of little, like, kind of community farms. And we made little patches of soil, which the goal was, how can we make the soil more biodiverse? And meanwhile, that biodiversity itself would be like a new driver for wealth, abundance for the people that live there. And we just created little plots. So on a neighborhood, like not like a super crazy, large farm or a beautiful community farm project or something like that. But we just started in a person's backyard and started, say, for example, picking the things in the garden to start make logos, for example, to acknowledge like different kind of biodiversity. And we created like such kind of farmlands and how to create like different ideas and businesses that might inspire us from there. So we're not stuck in the default mode, but then how to help each other to really engage and push it into the social space. And the funny driving factor and insight for us, realizing that a lot of small plot lands of suburban people, they don't know what to do with. They inherit from their parents, or they bought their land. But these small disjointed plots of land we work with. And I think this is a kind of thing that can spread, that the kind of people there were able to kind of re-engage with their own soil and start to create more like abundance from that. So I think this is a kind of thing where one of the voices was that are ways of reconnecting with our own lands and then finding ways to care for them. This is kind of like a very engaging activity for me, and it's been in the last few years very starting to show promise. Yeah.
Thank you, Tokusho. That was a really lovely example of a complex and systemic response to caring for the soils, the damaged soils. And I might be reading into things because I look for certain things when I'm looking at something like that. And I read into that there's more to it than just doing the instrumental act of taking an action to care for soil and then getting the results of healthier food. It's not just this one transmissive kind of notion, that there is a deeper sense of spirituality, belonging, and care. And that is a nice segue to Virginia's reminder that we look back to de la Bella Casa's definition of care, that it's not an ethical choice. It is a recognition of the fact that we need to care for one another. I'm just reading straight off of this, Virginia, but you can jump in and add anything if you'd like. That we need to care for one another because we're all interdependent with one another. And this is a necessary understanding. And it's also, I'm a practicing Buddhist, it's also a deep spiritual understanding that we're all in this together. And if you are okay, then I am okay. And Virginia, would you like to add anything to that?
Yes, Louise, thank you. I think you already said it. I think there is a risk there when we put too much emphasis on the ethical choice. And I think this is something to reflect upon, like how, like we can drive social innovation out of anthropocentrism, because to think that you care because you take good care of others, because you're good and you want to be good, it's still very kind of anthropocentric. So I think there is a risk there to slip in back again into the epistemological framework we want to, to escape from or to deal with in different ways. So just a short reminder of this sense of necessity perhaps being something interesting to look into, and this activity of mapping where there is need for care and what needs to be repaired or what needs to take care of.
Thanks, Virginia. It's nice to see you. Ezio and John, are you feeling left out yet? No. I'm seeing lots of people in this screen who I would really like to hear from, and it's just been so long. Francesco, how about you? You've got a very long message here in the chat. Do you want to speak it?
Hello. Yes. Thanks for that. I was wondering, since I'm actually doing something about this topic, and as Ezio, I'm coming from a real Western perspective, so sometimes it's very difficult for me to understand this, let's say, this tension between a Western kind of scientific knowledge and another kind of knowledge which is coming from other, let's say, points of view. So it's pretty difficult for me most of the time. I think, I make the connection between what we are doing and design for social innovation, meaning that for me, communities are made of several different life forms. So it's not just human beings, but other life forms. And this is like a process of translation, what we're trying to do. So trying to understand from our perspective, if animals, plants, and others may have a stand or role in this. So I was wondering if in your researches or in your practice, how much do you rely on other experts or representatives by citing Latour? Were you able to put in your research groups and in your practice? That is because sometimes, we are dealing with a kind of knowledge that is still very, let's say, unclear in its original domain. If we think about plant neurobiology and all the things that John showed us today, it's something that is still under development. So what is our stand in this?
I would like to hear from John on that one, but I can tell you that in one of our projects here on the west coast of Canada, we worked with biologists, and we learned that these biologists, through sheer years of observation, had developed an intuitive understanding of the creatures that were living below the surface of the water. So their knowledge was extremely helpful to our design students on that project. John?
So I just think it's very fascinating how many of my friends here feel uncomfortable with the unfinished nature of the discussion. Where is the to-do list? Where's the curriculum? I just think we need to be kind to ourselves and say, this is all very new, but this is the notion that we need a fixed and kind of authorized curriculum is something invented by the West and the North over a rather short period of time ago. Everybody else in the cultures that I know about finds it very normal to learn about a place on a continuous basis, develop relationships with all other living life forms on a continuous basis, and to do so in a collegial and collaborative way, and not, so to speak, thinking, oh, how do I do this? Two things. One, this notion of practices that are useful from outside design. Last week, I heard from a man called Oliver Moore, who works with farmers in Ireland, who organized since several years meetings in which farmers get around in a circle, as I showed you a picture from Italy. And he basically has said that after 10 years of this practice, the one thing that he's needed most is to learn how to do listening better, because he's like me, another author. People like me are very bad at listening. You could be taught how to listen by professional coaches and artists and all sorts of people who know how to do that. The second point is that we're all basically in a very dynamic situation in which if we want to learn about a place, which I think is pretty central to what we're all talking about, it's learning about this place, not learning about places in abstract. And by definition, this place changes every second of the day, wherever this place is. So it's a kind of an obstacle for design that we need to kind of think, stand still for a minute whilst we help you. And that's not possible. We have to work with the dynamism of life itself. So it's a big ask for designers, but it's just as big an ask if you're an ecologist or a scientist or all sorts of other people. We're all in this learning how to learn in a very unstable situation together. So we need to help each other.
Absolutely, and thank you. That was well said. Ezio.
Yes, two questions. Thanks to all the intervention, and it was very interesting as always. One question is, we can take this issue that it's new, at least for many of us, for the ones that are here, it's new. And by the point of view of doing something transformative for the transformative experiences for the human being, in the case for a young designer, if we are teachers, and for ourselves. So how we can transform our way of looking to the reality. That is very important. And the second issue is if we do some transformative action, some transformative design that becomes some transformative transformation, transformative action on the reality. Let's say if we design a pollinator corridors, that is something very concrete. And these two, of course, the best would be to make a pollinator corridor with people that is also transformed individually and vice versa. But probably the two things are linked together. So a way to transform, to generate this individual transformative experience is also to participate to a project that is transformative in the right way. And vice versa. If you have people that have this individual transformation, maybe they can have better idea on how to make something transformative into the reality. So the first statement is that some experience that we can do in school is mostly related to the change in us and in the students. And some project can be more related to the transformation of the reality. And the two things can go on in parallel without pretending that one comes before the other. So it's a little bit the old story of the chicken and the egg. So the two things goes together, and we can start where is better, or we can start at the same time in the two directions. The second thing is I will take the wonderful project presented before by Tokushu. Sorry, Tokushu. I think that before learning your name, it will take me a long time. Tokushu. Okay. And this social studio. That I find fantastic because it's very simple in some way. It's small, can be done. It looks very much what 15 years ago, we were talking about the creative communities. So we were looking, group of people that say, oh, look what they do together. They was living together. They was sharing the food. They was organizing different transformation. And so we was looking to these very simple things and observing that they had the power of showing different way of living, different quality, different idea of how could be a better life. And the example that he did for me is exactly the same. I will say that one is not per se the solution of everything, but at this point, it's a very clear example of a kind of biosocial innovation that could be the beginning of a larger story. And in my view, and this is the first thing. And the second thing is, it's very clever. It's not only so naive, because I think that if we really want to take care of the environment, this cannot be done if not done by people. So even though I think, I said before, it's not now the day to discuss very in depth, but I think that we need also change done by some big institution, because also that one are necessary, but really to care in such a diffuse way. There will never be an institution that can institutionally take care of everything. If we want to take care of everything, it's only the people, that the people is everything, everywhere. And so we can imagine this organization of group of people that take care of this and that. Now, take care, Virginia before was saying, be careful with care. Okay, we will be careful. But at the moment, let's say people that recognize themselves as linked to that soil, linked to that trees. So I think that at the end of the day, for me in this moment, the idea of in some way engaging the most of people in doing something for the caring of the environment is the only solution, because the problem is so big, so large, that nobody else will do it, if not the same people. So we have to reestablish the role of capability of care of people for the place where they are. Afterward, maybe we have to discuss care, to extend it, and so to avoid to make some problems, as Virginia was saying, but at the moment I don't have another term. So the idea that if the problem is so big, the only possibility is through social innovation. And as a matter of fact, it came in my mind that when we started to work on social innovation, we said that social innovation was needed for dealing with intractable problems. So problems that otherwise cannot be dealt with. And I think that this is one of the cases. And finally, again, with this example, but there could be other example, I totally agree that we have to learn from, we now designer, now I put my hat as a designer, we have to learn from others. But I think that there are some experiences that can be done thanks to the help that designer can generate, that generate knowledge that is design-based knowledge that can be helpful for the others. So if it is crystal clear that we have to learn, in this case by biologists or by other people that are working on the ground, but we can also, doing some kind of projects, generate some kind of knowledge that can be very helpful also for them. So we have to be capable to make projects at the end of the day. So this topic of the more than human has been much more discussed than really performed. I think that we have to dare to make things happen and try to be critical on what we are doing, and on these critiques to create some knowledge that could be good for us and can be good also, I think, for the others.
I think that it's really undisputed that through action and through engagement, we learn the most. And through action, we can actually transform our own ways of seeing and being in the world. I think in the cognitive sciences, there's a phrase about this. It's about, in activism, that's what it's called, in activism. So in activism, we learn. So Ezio, I hear what you're saying, that you are acknowledging the dimensions of the notion of care, that it's not a kind of a top-down thing that we do ethically, but that it is an engagement. It's a relational and reciprocal act that we do together in with a sense of honor for life and all of life forms. But that in order for that to really start to happen and change as many people as possible, it is through actions, through maybe small actions, through large actions, coordinated actions, diffuse actions, but that we all need to start doing things together. Can I ask a question? And it comes from John's presentation, where so many of the actions that he was showing us kind of relied on playing with technology, you know, the electricity in soil, the fact that soil could hold memories. Do we need to be playing with tech in order to develop our care relationships?
I can answer that question if you like, Louise. Just, there's others. The examples that I showed you today were in response to design professors saying, you must make it easier for designers to make this journey from the concern with technique to the concern with living systems. There needs to be a bridge experience or like a gateway experience. And I think some of those things have that quality to them. But to the second part of my answer would be absolutely no. Technology is a kind of subsidiary priority for me to designers connecting with real places and the real people in those places. And here we encounter another problem, which maybe we could discuss here, is that there's a long history of design groups going to an exotic forest or a farm or a desert and doing a work for a week and then making lots of concepts, and then they go home, leaving behind not very much. And what I've discovered is that we need to be much more mindful about finding local partners in a place who are going to be long-term partners. And long-term means that they have the trust and the connectivity with the networks that are already there, rather than us spending 5 or 10 years trying to reproduce those. And so one, perhaps it sounds strange, but one kind of test for whether your design project moving forwards is connecting with a living place in a good world is there a farmer in the group, a teacher, a librarian, a vicar, you know, a priest? Are there individuals in your group for the project who will be there after you go home, who can then help you connect in a respectful and a productive way? So it's to do with not just other scientists or people with exotic technical skills, it's also to do with the social embeddedness of the project, which I think has to be long-term. We're talking about the long-term here. So to me, that is one of the ways in which one can get embedded in a locality, inhabit it respectfully, and not make the mistake of just flying in and flying out.
Very well said, thank you. Valentina, you're telling us in the chat about a project that sounds similar to what John is saying. Do you want to tell us a little bit more? Valentina, where are you?
Hi. Sorry, my voice is not good. That's why I wrote it in the chat. But it's a really interesting project that brings like a new sight on nature in the city, and it is similar to what John is saying, because it brings not only specialists in the matter to the investigation, it brings students, it brings people in the city that lives with this like new vision of land. I don't know, I know that you're familiarized with the term of bioblitz. So what they did was they brought the whole community of in Chile, in Santiago, we have a river that is the Rio Mapocho that goes through the whole city. So it's a great part of our community and our city. So the idea was to bring the whole community of Santiago, which is the capital of Chile, closer to these new territories that were like unseen. They were always there. They were like wild territories, because there were no control over these plants, these species. So the idea was to bring like the community together, not only specialists, but people that were just living in these territories closer to these species that coexist. The investigation is from there is a national magazine that it's called Endemico. I will send the link in the chat so you can check it out. It's really interesting how they speak this. I cannot say it like they say it, so I will send the link.
Thank you. Thank you. If you could put that in the chat, that would be fabulous.
I just wanted to connect quickly. I think, Valentina, you speak beautifully. It must very, very clearly. I understood it perfectly well. The only thing that I've discovered in the last period is the people are getting anxious about protecting wild and damaged places because there's a lot of biodiversity in abandoned, ruined bits of cities. And now many of us are saying, oh, we must go there and look at all that biodiversity. I can imagine it becoming like when artists would go to an abandoned building, occupy the building, and then the area would become gentrified and nobody could afford to live there. There's some evidence that biodiversity will become the new gentrification. I have no idea what the answer is, but I'd love to know more about this project because I think it sounds fantastic. I'm a huge fan of bioblitzes, of getting people involved.
Yeah, it's a nice project. Yeah, I will send it. Thank you.
Fantastic. We're close to wrapping up our conversation for today. Is there anyone who has an urgent, just gotta say this feeling that they want to jump in? Oh, yes. Okay, Anna.
Thank you. I just came a little bit late into this discussion, but I would love to share with you an idea that I have recently learned, because during the past 4 weeks, I have been reading this kind of non-human personas. You know that in design thinking, creative thinking, and especially in futures thinking, we use personas. They could be, you know, some kind of characters in the future. So I learned to rewrite these non-human personas, and I feel that I have learned so much about being a worm or being a butterfly or an urban fox or any type of animal or plant even. So I highly recommend you to test your imagination and creativity in this way, because it has changed my perspective. Like Louise, you said, who has the voice? Who has the authority? And when you have a workshop where you use these scenarios and personas, why not to have these non-human personas included into the discussion? There's so much to learn from them. I just wanted to share my experience because it's a very novel thing. So I love to create them. I have plenty of them already.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
If I may say something to Anne, I've been trying to work with my students for the last 2 years with non-human personas. And for them, it's really difficult to think outside of human personas. It's a challenge for them, and it's not easy. And not all of them manage to create these non-human personas. But I think it's really important. So I'm quite happy that you are already doing this.
Yeah, thanks for support.
It's important work. It's very important work. You might be interested in Val Plumwood's essay, Nature in the Active Voice, where she encourages us to all embrace writing as a way of speaking for nature. As we wrap up, Kate Fletcher, Multi-Human Centered Worlds. Thank you, Kate, for non-human personas. And then Ezio would really like us all to step forward if we want to participate in a thematic cluster on this topic. I think Ezio, you've mentioned that already,
yes.
And probably does not need to be belabored. But are there any closing thoughts from John or Ezio?
John?
You are muted, John.
Sorry, yes, I pressed the wrong button again. I just want to thank you to Ezio and for, the team for making this possible. I just want to repeat, this is something, it's not new actually, but it's very old what we're doing, but it is new for many of us in the design world. And the more we can have this very open and very respectful conversations, the better. As far as possible, have these conversations outside design institutions and in locations that are not normal to us. Just being in a place with farmers or with different sorts of people than we're used to is just, to me, where the kind of transformations are going to come. But I don't need to belabor that. I just want to thank you for making this day possible.
Thank you, John. And thanks to everybody. My last issue for the moment is the following. I think that this discussion is not new, but there is something new that also emerged in the way in which things have been presented. I find that what is interesting and in some way also intriguing is that we are talking about environmental issue in some way. And if we talk about environmental issue, for sure, when we talk about environmental issue, there is a sense of urgency. So we are facing a catastrophe. So in some way, in other moments, we have said that we have really to use all our capability, including the design one, including the design for social innovation one, to try to, in some way, oppose to what is happening. And so both in design way and politically, we should find a way to try to really voice very strongly. At the same time, in a discussion as today, the voice is most smooth, sweet, nice, and with long term, and it's important. And we know that if we do not have the time to go more in depth in things, we will not change, and also around us, things will not change. But we have to put together these two elements. We have to put together in some way the way and the timing to have this kind of care, because we know the care in the sense that we said, the care is a reciproc, ask for time to deal with all this relationship, these interactions. And at the same time, we have a sense of urgency that something has to be done and it has to be the strongest that is possible, as quick as that is possible. Well, I think that we have to get accustomed to live in the contradiction. So one has not to be opposed to the other ones. In some way, you have to find the solution, how to balance and live together, this double level. And so as Thesis, we are, as Thesis as a whole, very involved in the urgency of what is related to the climate and the environmental and the ecological disasters. And at the same time, we have to take our time and put some energy to go in depth with the time that is needed, with the experimental attitude that we have said today, to really try to find the new ideas and to give to the new ideas some new practice. And so we have a life beyond us. So good luck to everybody. And thank you. I don't know, Teresa, final word, you that are the boss here.
Yeah, I just want to thank John, Ezio, and Louise, and all the participants. This was one of the most amazing events that we did. So I'm quite sure most of us will re-watch this on our YouTube channel because it will be available there. We are receiving also a lot of emails from people that are interested on this topic. If you want, please send an email to the DESIS coordination, as Gisela has put on the chat. And thank you very much for all your participation. I think it's too late in some parts of the world. Tokushu and June, I think you are still here, and Francesca also. So thank you very much, and hope to see you very, very soon following up these conversations.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
Goodbye.